Meeting of 15 June 2021. I'd like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the City Infrastructure Committee meeting. I'd like to advise meeting attendees that this meeting is being webcasted and audio recorded. I note that we've received a leave of absence from Councillor Russell due to medical leave and Mayor Powell due to personal leave. Are there any further leave of absences to consider? I note that Councillor Jeremiah is coming in remotely through the internet. Councillor Jeremiah, you're with us now?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. Can I please have a mover for the motion for the leave of absence? Councillor Bradley, seconded Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That is carried unanimously, noting that Councillor Bannon is not in the room. Pardon? Councillor Jeremiah, how are you voting? For. Thank you very much. The motion has been carried. Moving on to reports. Item 4.1 is a report into the potential road upgrade, Beenleigh Road, Underwood. I'll now refer to item 4.1. Can the Road Infrastructure Planning Manager, Mr. Kamal Ranawira, please enter the discussions? Before we open this discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I now refer to open public discussion. Mr. Ranawira, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. The report is about road upgrades to Beenleigh Road, Underwood, which runs east-west direction between Logan Road and Miller Road. The report addresses a previous resolution as well, which is included in the report. There are two parts to upgrades, intersection as well as mid-block. We are going to do widening. The four-way intersection at Cascade Drive, which is approximately about 150-160 meters from Logan Road, provides access to Cascade Drive residents as well as the Underwood shopping town. So the right turn movement, traffic movement is significant there because of the access to Underwood shopping town. However, the intersection works, the capacity is adequate for that intersection if it operates in isolation. But that is not the case. The other intersection which provides access to Mail Centre happens to be very close to the Cascade Drive intersection. As a result, two intersections need to now work in tandem manner, in an efficient manner, in other words. The identified work as outlined in the report, there is a diagram in the report which actually says what type of work we are going to do. And they are interim works because we don't know what's going to happen with the Mail Centre development in the future. This work will alleviate some of the problems that we are having now. The diagram actually has numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the type of works that we are going to do. Number 1 refers to where we need to install some additional smart loops to introduce the smartness to trigger the right turn movements. At the moment, if a vehicle passes through that intersection to Underwood's Mail Centre, it triggers right turn movements. With this smartness, it will not trigger until someone is waiting. Number 2 is about we are going to do a smart arm with all the traffic lanterns there, so it is a road safety matter, so people can see clearly their lanterns. Number 3 is about, again, road safety, turning left onto Cascade Drive. They allow people to allow pedestrians to cross over without a risk. Number 4 indicates normal reposition of lanterns. So, as I said, the configuration is interim, but it will all depend on the development that's going to happen in the Mail Centre in the future. And our preference is to collapse those two intersections into one intersection. The second part of the work is the widening. You will see an attachment to the report which actually provides the 4-lane widening option. the cost of that widening is about $500,000. And it is possible to widen from one side, from where it stops to Miller Road. The widening projects will qualify into major roads statement of intent. However, the problem is this, there are millions of dollars of work there in front of this project, and it has to stay in a queue for a very long time. So recommendation is written considering this fact to do the design and wait and apply for funding, external funding opportunities. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr Ranawira. I'll now open the floor for discussion. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you. Through the Chair, Councillor Lane, I appreciate the opportunity to talk on this particular matter because whilst it's not the area I represent, I certainly historically have had a lot of feedback from constituents about this particular road over the years because, as you know, Division 1 did include a section of Underwood at some stage, and a lot of constituents I used to represent, and I still effectively do represent because I represent the whole city, had issues with not only these intersections but also the road. And it's very pleasing to hear that the intent is to widen the road because that was one of the things that I raised, and also converting the intersections into one. I think that is a big positive. And can you just maybe elaborate how and when you anticipate that to occur?
The identified work for the intersection is in the SOI for intersection upgrade. I think, if I'm not wrong, it's already happening now. We have a scope that work and handed over to Road Tech to deliver that matter, deliver the upgrades to the intersection. So that's already happening. However, the ultimate configuration of the intersection is dependent on the development over there. The widening, as I mentioned before, is planned, but the funding is not there at the moment. So that's the reason we will probably need to put into we need to design it, get ready, and apply for external fundings when it's available.
Just to elaborate, obviously there's other areas of the city with very similar sort of scenarios. I can just think of Rochdale Road, for example, and whilst that is a boundary road, probably, in my opinion, there should be designing of all other roads similar to this, where we, you know, if there is an opportunity for funding, we should have those designs already there.
That's your last one, Councillor Bradley? Okay. Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually wanted to commend you on your good advocacy on this one. I know that it was a huge issue for you during your election campaign, and that a number of residents in that area raised it with you. And I, as the planning chair, you tried to put some pressure on a developer to do the upgrade, and when that failed, you went through another route, and now you've got designs so that funding can be attracted, and hopefully this project can be delivered much sooner rather than later. And for a new councillor who's seen a long-term issue like this and leaned into it straight away and got an outcome like this within a year, it's great work, and I think you deserve all the praise that we can heap on you for that. So keep it up.
What do you want, Councillor Raven? No, I'm just kidding.
Just a smile from you, Madam Chair.
And it worked. Thank you so much. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. Just curious, page 6, the changes have been planned as interim treatments, recognising further modifications to the intersection are expected. How long do you think that these planned interim treatments will last for?
Interim treatment should work for a, I don't know, but it all depends on the developments that's going to happen around that as well. So when the developments happens in the mail centre, we need to know what that development is, what sort of traffic it's going to generate. So at the moment, currently it can survive for 5-6 years if it continues like this, yes.
Okay, and currently where does this sit on the SOI?
It's not in the SOI currently. The intersection is in the SOI, but not the widening, sorry. Intersection is in the SOI to do interim treatment.
I'm just trying to work out where this sits, where residents are sitting in queues of 100 metres compared to the Teviot Road roundabout interchange where they're sitting for 3.3 Ks.
If I may, I think Councillor Wilcox is referencing that in the report you wrote that residents are queuing up to 100 metres on Beenleigh Road, whereas in her division they're queuing 3.3 kilometres to get through an intersection, and she's asking you, does this upgrade sit above or below her intersection?
Both intersections are in the SOI. Yeah. Again, yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair. The two projects we're talking about are actually in different programs. They're not in the same program. So the intersection which you're talking about at Middle Road and Teviot is actually in the SRIA program, which effectively creates an SOI, which has a funding source of its own. The work which we're talking about at Beenleigh Road would be attached to the Major Roads Capital Program, which is actually a separate program and a separate funding source. So they're not in direct competition for that same funding. So I don't have a comparison of one to the other because they wouldn't be funded from that same location. Certainly as it stands at the moment, the widening component only isn't funded within the Major Roads Statement of Intent, which is why the report's saying only to actually fund the design component only, because if it is to wait for that program, it will be quite some ways down the track, but it does give council the opportunity, if there are appropriate funding sources from external sources, to be able to make application to that. A lot of those funding programs have very short timeframes for delivery, so without you actually have projects designed, it becomes hard to make application for those.
So my next question is, if Councillor Lane was able to get the funding up for this now so that she can get her road widened, can I do something similar with Teviot and Middle Road so that I can fund the planning for it, because mine's still not going anywhere, it's still stagnant, I have people, I still have like umpteen residents contacting me every week over the same thing. I've been campaigning about this and mine's still not going anywhere.
Through you, Madam Chair, if that's okay. Certainly that Middle Road and Teviot intersection is an intersection which we have put up for some external funding in some of those applications. Certainly with the LRCI, I believe we put up that intersection, and I believe we have actually attracted some of that funding towards that interim treatment at that intersection. That is an intersection which we acknowledge is a significant one for the city. It's certainly one that we will be looking to continue our focus on. Yeah.
Have you got any other questions, Councillor Wilcox? Councillor Bannon?
Thank you, through the chair. So being in the SRIA, has been in that program, and which I believe is coming up, some of the roads have been looked at in the next couple of weeks.
Through you, Madam Chair, there is under the Sub-Regional Infrastructure Agreement, there is a 5-yearly review which is actually looked at in terms of that. So at the moment, Logan Council has engaged consultants to look at the priorities under that, and we will be engaging with EDQ between now and June next year to actually adopt a revised plan. So yes, we are in the process of looking at those at the moment, but that won't be resolved within the next month. That is a big piece of work where we need to engage with both EDQ and the major developers in the PDA areas that are signatories to that agreement. Yes.
Through the chair, so being in the SRIA, does that limit you more than being in, say, the major road program? Does it limit you more? Because if you're in a major roads program, you can do something that's been done here, or if you're in the SRIA, does it put more limitations on you because of the externals and the developers and the contract that took so long to get through? Does it actually make it harder to try and bring things forward?
Through you, Madam Chair, There certainly are more parties involved to that which we need to engage with, but we should do that anyway. Certainly the significant upside for council in regards to the SRIA is it attracted a significant amount of funding to council to actually be able to upgrade those roads in that part of our network where we're seeing the major growth. Prior to the creation of the SRIA, we actually didn't have that funding source, which will come to us from developers, nor did we have in place the loan structures which councils put in place when we signed into that infrastructure agreement to be able to upgrade that infrastructure over the next 40 years, depending on the order that we actually do those in. So the SRIA, while it probably is more difficult, the more people you have around the table, it certainly created the funding mechanism for all of those roads, which if I go back 2-3 years, so the agreement's been in place since 2019. Prior to that, the funding for all of those was unknown. So it certainly has created a lot more certainty than we had prior to that.
If you indulge me, Madam Chair, so I think with the SRIA coming up, when these progress of the roads, I think that has to be critical that we do have some input in that, simply because once those roads are locked in, look at Edelston Road, it was impossible to change that road because threatening to change that road could unravel the whole $1.2 billion deal or whatever the amount was. So that's why I do think that we need to get those roads critically right, because if they're in a major roads program, we can move them around because it's just internal. But once we hit that SRIA, it's impossible to change someone's decision. So I really think this next part's critical, especially for Councillor Wilcox with the dramas that she got and the dramas I've got with the half of Edelston Road getting done, which I know is something that can't be gone back on, but I'd like to learn from the mistakes that were made in the past, if that makes sense.
Through you, Madam Chair. Certainly engagement with the councillors is something we will need to do on the process through that before we actually get to a signed agreement for that outcome. We will look at a structured way to do that with the councillors. Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeremiah, have you got any questions?
No questions.
No worries. Look, I would just like to say that when I was doing my campaign, this road was an issue for local residents. In fact, some of the accidents are bumper car accidents where they're just donging into the back of each other because there's so many lights in quick succession. It's a heavily used road each day, and BCC is responsible for a large portion of the traffic going through that road on their way to the M1, but they're not going to contribute. So I did approach the roads branch and I did ask them whether or not there's capacity to widen that road. They investigated and they looked at the reserve and came back with a yes. This is a culmination of that work, and I appreciate that everyone has challenges out in their areas. I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Anawira and the roads team for bringing this report forward. I do appreciate it, and local residents will. A 500k project in the greater scheme of things is one of the smaller ones that we will have around the city. So if there's an opportunity for smaller funding, we might be able to knock this one over. Councillor Murphy, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say congratulations on your advocacy, and not to put a dampener on either Councillor Wilcox or Councillor Bannon, but to congratulate you, and I'm happy to move this for you.
Thanks very much. There's no other questions from the floor. Councillor Murphy's moved it. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Raven. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Councillor Jeremiah, how are you?
4.
Thanks, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to item 4.3. I'll now refer to item 4.3 pardon? Oh yeah, I forgot 4.2. Let's do that one. I was so excited I've got an approval. Item 4.2, feasibility study of the recreational trail from Bethania to Logan Village along the disused rail corridor. I'll now refer to item 4.2. Before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I will foreshadow that there will be a proposed amendment to Resolution 2 as part of this item. I'll now open public discussion. Mr. Ranawira, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The report is about converting the section of disused rail corridor from Bethania to Logan Village into a recreational rail trail. The main aim of the report is to write to the Minister requesting to secure the funding for design and construction. There is some history to this matter, and we have briefed Council in the past. Ever since Department of Transport invited Council to take over the lease of the disused rail corridor from Bethania to Port Desert, there's some deliberations and decisions were made in the past. But in 2018, the Minister announced a funding source, an offer for rail trails, mentioning the Bethania to Port Desert corridor specifically. The offer included 100% funding for feasibility and design, and 50-50 funding for construction of rail trail. There is a letter attached to the report, which is the Minister's letter of offer for funding. Council, considering the offer, and subsequently applied for funding to carry out a feasibility study for section from Bethania to Logan Village. Acceptance was received from TMR then in November 2020, around that, and we appointed Birchall's consultant to carry out the feasibility study. Consultant has now come back with an indicative cost, which is included in the report, stating the project is feasible, outlining some of the issues or risks that need to be attended. It's also in the report. More importantly, we have also planned a briefing session for councillors to give the feedback from the consultant, all the details of the feasibility study. I know that it's a bit back to front, but we were trying to get the timing right here, so that's the reason we had to leave the briefing later date. Obviously, further consultation of residents need to happen. We believe that we want that to happen during design phase. That will happen, and some consultation has happened, but not to the extent as a formal consultation. So, the report is seeking endorsement to write to the Minister. In other words, thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I'll now open the floor for discussion. Councillor Kerensky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With your indulgence, more commentary than questions, if you don't mind. This project has attracted a huge amount of community interest right from the get-go, and earlier this year, Councillor Hall and I had the opportunity to attend a community meeting which was led by the Friends of Logan Historic Recreation Trail, and I believe we've got members of that group here with us today. We heard from both advocates of the project and also some of the concerns that were raised as part of that project. Residents at the meeting told us that they're enthusiastic around walking and cycling trails, and they liked being able to safely walk along a route that's free from traffic. Some were in favour of preserving the trail, installing interpretive signage and using it to access public transport. And the potential for the rail trail to be a local tourist attraction like the Brisbane Valley Rail Trail was discussed, and certainly all the work that's been going on in Logan Village, this is a complementary project. Others raised with us concerns for the potential for antisocial behaviour on the trail, environmental impacts, maintenance and impacts on residents who border the track, and most significantly this includes the residents of the Palm Lake communities of Waterford and Bethania. Independently, I'm sure others have contacted me, and they've certainly contacted Councillor Hall, raising some of those concerns. And I'd just like to take a moment to really thank the committee chair, Councillor Lane, who's helped manage some of these concerns with residents as well. As you mentioned, Kamal, we haven't yet got to a formal stage of community engagement from a council perspective, and I'm very enthusiastic about being able to go out to the community and more broadly engaging with them. Given the magnitude of the project, I'd already foreshadowed with the director the potential maybe to utilise council's community engagement team, officers like Tamara Weaver and so on, and get them involved in a very formalised form of engagement. But as councillors would be aware, I've long been a strong advocate for the project, and I recognise the potential to provide the community with a really long-standing legacy project for this council. And I'm hugely excited to progress this, and I'm looking forward to hearing the ultimate design coming forward. But I'm glad that our feasibility study, which was provided by external consultants, has returned a finding that this is indeed a feasible project. So with that in mind, it's with great pride that I would like to move that this report be adopted.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kransky. Councillor Bradley.
Yeah, thank you through the chair, Councillor Lane. As you're probably aware, I've been in this council for a while, not as long as the mayor, who isn't here obviously. But so historically, Mr. Ranawira, you did actually say there has been some concerns over the years, and I've listened to those concerns, and Councillor Kransky did actually state a couple of those in her commentary. I suppose I'm concerned, and this is why I put my hand up, because of those historical expressed concerns from previous councillors about antisocial behaviour, about concerns of having people going past their properties and possibly, you know, having access to their property that they wouldn't have had access previously to, and the concerns about theft, etc., antisocial behaviour. Also the concerns about the cost impost on council for having such an expensive project. I understand that, you know, there is $7 million that is projected as indicative cost for this, but there's the ongoing cost of maintenance, etc. And once you open up Pandora's box for one section, you open up Pandora's box for other sections to be opened up. And historically, this has been a preserved road, from memory, a preserved corridor for rail. And I just want to ask the question, when is it anticipated that this rail connection would actually be opened up by TMR? Because obviously this is an interim thing until such time that occurs. Could you just talk to that, please?
The question is about whether TMR will open this for rail purposes?
Historically, that is what has been communicated. They wanted to leave it there for rail purposes. So can you talk to when they anticipate they will have that service?
We haven't got any, we haven't heard anything from TMR about that plan.
If I could just continue through the chair, please, if that's all right. You did say at the start that there was a change in number 2 of the recommendation. Is it possible to actually look at what that is and have that explained?
Mr. Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the second item, I've requested that there be a change. So the original wording was actually indicating that we put onto the future budgets register the 50% funding requirement, but the way it read was implying that it was the 50% funding requirement that we were actually asking from TMR, whereas the future budget register should actually be referencing it's the 50% funding, which would actually be required by council. So it was only for clarity of that. It doesn't actually change the outcome. I suspect it's how people read it, but I just wanted to be clear in the wording that was in there so that it wasn't ambiguous later. Yep.
Any further questions, Councillor Bradley?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And last term I was the chair of the City Centre Special Committee, and when we hosted the Logan Village Summit, there was a very loud and clear message given to us by the community that they wanted to see this corridor, this rail trail, preserved specifically as a public transport corridor for the future. The best way to preserve something like this is to use it for the community's benefit. Because if you just ignore it and you leave it sitting there in the background, then gradually over time you get encroachment from development, you get encroachment from TMR themselves deciding to intrude onto the corridor, and eventually you get to a point where there is nothing left to actually put any future public transport through. So when Councillor Bradley rightly refers to this as an interim measure, it's an interim measure in a truly transport and main road sense of the term, in that it could be a 50 to 100 year interim measure. But by putting that in place, it makes sure that this corridor is preserved for future public transport use, which is what our city will need when we have 500,000 or more people living here by 2042. This recommendation is actually a big deal for a whole other reason though, because historically there was a council position that essentially said that we were against doing anything with this corridor. And so it's been very difficult to attract funding. It's been very difficult to support staff in being able to investigate this, test how feasible it is. And it's taken a lot of work by the divisional councillors, Councillor Karansky, Councillor Hall, and then eventually Councillor Bannon when it heads out Bowie Way. Jim Boomboy, he's already doing it, he reckons. So, but the push from those three councillors and yourself, Madam Chair, has meant that we've been able to get it to this point. And this will be the first time when the official position of council actually aligns with the messages that I've been hearing from the community, that they very much want this, and that these councillors have been hearing from their communities that it's something that they would love to utilise, it's something they'd love to see. And yes, with all improvements, all enhancements, there can be some teething problems and some concerns, but I'm sure that Mr. Ranawira and the team will make sure that whatever is delivered takes into consideration those concerns. And if we can get $3.5 million from the state government, I think that's money well spent. That's money for JAM to enhance our community and give them a facility that is quite unique for this part of southeast Queensland. I don't know why anyone would want to go all the way to Brisbane Valley to do anything, let alone use a rail trail, but they could come to Logan instead, spend their hard-earned here and support our local businesses. I'm very much in support.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Councillor Raven and Councillor Kerensky's sentiments on the rail trail. In regards to some of the things outlined from Councillor Bradley, you'd have those issues whether the area was activated or not. People can still jump on the trail as it is and jump onto people's properties from that trail the way it is. At least if you were to do something, you'd activate that area. And when you activate an area, you actually decrease those types of problems because the area is active and people that are on it are held more accountable. Not only that, this is an important thing for the city. It'd be a legacy item because you're basically connecting the city. You know, you're connecting the city through footpath routes. And I understand this is very important to many Indigenous people who live in the city as well, to be able to walk from different areas to other. It's part of the legacy of the city to do that. Not only that, but it activates a tourism culture within the city, which is very important for the local businesses because, you know, they are competing with other bigger businesses, but when you've got these areas activated in terms of tourism, they're more likely to visit a local cafe or a local shop or something like that. And it is important for me to have this set up in Bethania because, you know, it's part of my vision for kids to be able to walk on this trail to school or to the train in safety without having to be next to a road, walking next to a road. So I think this would be an important step towards connecting the city up, and it has my full support as a divisional councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Bannon.
Thank you, through the chair. It's great to have councillors on board with this. It doesn't always have to be the big concrete one that we're doing. Like, there's different sections have different things. So the maintenance costs will be minimal on the sections that I want to do from Logan Village towards my border. I want community groups to have that ownership of each section. I want the community groups, the Mayors College, to come out onto the rail trail and sell their jams and their biscuits and fundraise every weekend. And they maintain that part. That's how the community groups get involved and keep it secure. Like, the people out here, we are screaming for this. So I couldn't be more supportive of it. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing towards making it happen.
Thanks very much. I've responded to residents who some people might describe them as NIMBYs, but they're certainly not. I think that they're expressing concerns about someone walking along their back fence. And as Councillor Raven pointed out, they can walk along the back fence now, and Councillor Hall have pointed that out. I think that referencing other areas where walking trails and bike trails have opened up, and recognising that the ownership of those property owners in actually making sure that their yards are secure is not a bad thing. The response back was quite positive to one particular resident who had a number of concerns, and Councillor Karansky forwarded that person on to me, and I very much appreciate her advocacy. The person's frightened, and it's fear of the unknown, but when we referred him to another location to go and have a look at it, he was very keen to have a look at how they're operating, what systems are in place to preserve people's safety and security, and he was very accepting and very, I'm not saying he's absolutely on board, but he certainly had a reference point from which to start with. It's fear of the unknown that drive people into opposing a lot of things, as it would with the residents in Bethania. I think this is a great initiative for the local community, and I'm so pleased that you've been driving this, Councillor Karansky. It's going to be a lot of fun in the future. That being said, is there any more questions for the Director or the Manager? None. Okay, can I have a mover for the motion? Councillor Bradley?
Thank you. And I do acknowledge, through the Chair, if that's okay, Councillor Lane, that councillors referred to what I stated. I was stating basically what has been stated by other councillors historically. That's not necessarily my point of view, it is what has been stated.
Yeah, I think that's really valid that you pointed out that the last council wasn't on board with this, and that Councillor Karansky persevered despite other councillors' concerns and worked with the community. And I think that's a really valid points to raise, Councillor Bradley, during this discussion. I think that that's a really good thing to do, and it gave us the opportunity to open up and actually talk about options that we've put to the community and how they've accepted it, or how they've challenged those assertions and asked more questions, which is the community's right to do. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Karansky, seconded Councillor Hall. All those in favour, raise your hands. Councillor Heremiah, how are you voting? Thank you, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll now go to item 4.3. Item 4.3 is report infrastructure impacts by Inland Rail project. This is going to be a hot topic. Before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I now refer to open public discussion. Mr Ranawira, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I talk to the report, I also like to mention that there had been some internal consultation to put together this report. Specifically, I would like to mention the advocacy program, and most of the content in the report is about advocacy as well. Is written to address previous resolution. The resolution is in the report as well. When we talk about rail corridor, there are 4 parties to consider. Obviously, the community living close to the rail corridor, and also there are impacts on the community. Secondly, the Logan City Council needs to support the PDA community, and potential impact of LCC infrastructure need to be considered as well. Thirdly, the state governments, specifically TMR and EDQ, TMR specifically, TMR now have the task to do the approval for this project, Inland Rail project. TMR has the most important task of delivering the Salisbury to Port Desert passenger rail. So their role is really important. Obviously, EDQ needs to manage the PDA development. So lastly but not least, ARTC, who will deliver and manage the Inland Rail project. So mitigating and managing impacts for residents. We've been talking about the environmental concerns, including air noise and vibration, for some time. ARTC is carrying out their studies, and they are putting together mitigation measures. However, we must also agree to apply the mitigation measures in an ongoing basis, which probably needs to be in somewhere there. That's in the recommendation. So we need ongoing, if you are going to address the mitigation measures on an ongoing basis, we need to have an agreement. At the same time, the mitigation measure should cover the future developments as well. So that's because, for example, if we put up the fences, noise fences at the locations where the existing residents live, it needs to extend to the future residents' locations as well. Now, impacts on council infrastructure, there are a few. The report outlined at least 2 or 3 of them. One of, the most obvious one is the construction time impacts, haulage routes and site access routes. They are mapped, and the map is provided in the report. They basically, the impacts will be the amenity impacts, the road use impact or the consumption impacts, the road safety impacts. So basically what we are suggesting in the report is not to use roads where there are communities, existing communities are. And if you talk about access roads, the access roads are to access these sites. They are in locations where they could be cul-de-sacs, the local access roads. They are not built to take heavy construction loads. So there could be a case for us to ask ARTs to come and rehabilitate them at the end of the construction. Lastly but not least, there are 5 bridges, and those bridges are key to our construction, provide services to PDA, in other words. Obviously, bridge construction or crossover construction is really, really expensive. That could burden council to provide services to PDA. So they need to be considered. Those bridges are listed in the report as well. Finally, I think I should mention about the state government responsibilities. Salisbury to Buddhisett passenger rail. The report says that the funding was received for business case under the bilateral agreement between federal government and Queensland government. So the report is suggesting or proposing that work need to be completed before they give approval to the Inland Rail. So I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Ranawira. Councillor Wilcox.
Just preempting, I didn't even put up my hand. You didn't need to. Thank you, Councillor Lane. Just curious, this might come out of the meetings that we're not in, which is why I'm asking for minutes from meetings. With the mitigation measures, we're only aware that they're only putting them up for construction with the fencing. So are we now advocating for the fencing to extend to all the future residents along the line?
What we are trying to say in the recommendation is to have an agreement with the RTC. If the requirement is there for them to extend it in the future, then that agreement should activate those requirements.
Okay, so my next question with the fencing, the residents want it, I really want it, it's needed, and that sort of thing. But with S2B, which is also basically going to be in the same corridor as K2ARB, how do we put the fencing up, mitigating K2ARB in the first place? And then if they don't do S to B at the same time, what are we doing with the fencing? Because this is my whole issue with the state and the federal governments when they're organising or they're coordinating this whole project, is they've got 2 projects, ideally in the same route, to try and coordinate it together with the bridges to get done and the fencing to get done. For me, it would make more sense to advocate to get all of it done at once.
It's a good question. That's the reason we are asking TMR to consider completing the business case for the passenger rail. So we'll know what requirements are there for them to widen the bridges, if if widening is required. We know the land take as well. We know if there are any impacts on passenger rail, we will know that as well. So that's the reason we are asking that piece of work to complete before giving the approval to Inland Rail.
Okay. I just want to go to the recommendations. So in B, ARTC to be subject to legally binding triggers for upgrading impact mitigation. At the moment, their noise levels and everything are modelled. So what are we using for a trigger to make sure that we get the best for the residents?
I'm not an expert in these areas, to be honest, but we need to, that's the reason we are asking for some funding as well to do that kind of work, And the triggers, probably noise, air, and vibration, the RTC is putting their triggers, and we need to look at those triggers and come to an agreement whether they are applicable or not. At the same time, we know that some of the triggers, some of the measures that they put in place may not work. So there could be cracks on the buildings or whatever. So what will happen then? The agreement should cover that as well.
Okay. And so the funding that's in F, where it's the federal government to provide $750,000 in grant funding, you were referring to?
Yeah, basically what I thought was there's about 150 million worth of bridge upgrades need to be done. So that only indicative, I know that, but in a rough estimate. So based on that, 0.5% of that is 750,000. So that's how I got that value. It's an indicative value.
The only thing I'm concerned about with F is the way that it's written. Me reading it, I'm reading 750,000, and then you get to the bottom of it and it says over the next 20 years. And that equates to $37,500 over 20 years. So is it meant to be $750,000 in grant funding straight up? Okay, I'm not sure if we can amend that in there so that it just reads that bit better, because me reading it, I'm just like,
Happy to
over
amend
20
it.
years. Wondering if we can also, in C, ARTC be required to use transport routes for site access that avoid densely populated residential areas, school zones and peak hour? Because when you're referring to the map on page 23, and I know that this is us guessing, I guess, about where the haulage routes will be, but I don't understand why Middle Road is missing. Apparently they're not using that section of road. There's a big red section missing, where they're going to go back up to Johnson Road.
Middle Road at Boronia Heights.
The roads that was given to us by the group of engineers that we work with, this is how we came up with these routes. And they have qualified saying that when they award the contract, these could change. This route could change. The contractor will choose another way. So we have to keep an eye on these routes going forward. It is all indicative at the moment.
So we're still in the dark. We still have no answers from ARTC. You still can't get answers from ARTC about what they're doing.
Mr Director, I think you're going to take this one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly the report as it's written isn't suggesting that we have the answers to all of those questions. It really is that advocacy piece now that we know that the process to actually get to the approvals moved from the Coordinator General to TMR. And given that we don't know what their pathway is to actually give those approvals, we're really just trying to, I guess, move those things which you've raised as concerns which we don't know the answer to, actually get them formulated and actually send that to TMR so that we can actually express those concerns. So the report's certainly not a solution. The report really is trying to advocate those things that we don't yet know, as you've quite rightly pointed out, and trying to actually get on the front foot in regards to that.
Councillor Wilcox.
When we're saying we're mitigating and managing the impacts on council infrastructure, we've got the cost of road upgrades, the road maintenance and bridge safety barriers. It's not just a bridge safety barrier. I think it needs to be bridge upgrades, because it is 5 bridges and there is quite a substantial amount of work that needs to go into those 5 bridges. So wondering if we can change that to not just say bridge safety barriers, but bridge upgrades.
I'm sorry, this is in one of the recommendations?
I know it's on page 17. No. But we've talked about it all through the report.
Item D.
Yeah. Yes. Item D. Bridges are safe and maintained in good condition. Then I think that needs to read that there's bridge upgrades. And I quite like on page 17 how you actually say all of the above mentioned roads will require upgrades to higher standards, many of them requiring upgrades to dual carriageway arterial standards to support the growth planned in the Greater Flagstone PDA. But that I don't really read in the recommendations.
Let's just go with the bridge response first and then we'll get to the other.
With that item in item D where it says bridge safety barriers, if we would actually just remove the safety barriers and make it bridges. Any road upgrades, road maintenance and bridges, or bridge upgrades necessary to ensure road safety and bridges are safe.
So item D, we're removing, you're suggesting we move the word upgrades and just bridge?
If we remove the word safety barriers and where safety barriers were, put upgrades.
It doesn't
bridge
say safety
upgrades.
barriers in the recommendation.
It does in mine.
Oh, okay.
Yep, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that would be that proposed change, so that it's more generic, I think was what you were chasing in
You happy with
regards to
that,
those
councillor
upgrades.
Wilcox? And then the next item is the dual carriageways. Page 17 of the report.
Can we actually put that one in the recommendation? That sentence that yes, many of the road infrastructure or road network will require upgrades to dual carriageway.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, we certainly have referenced in there that we are talking about fully funding road upgrades. It's probably more significant than just the dual lanes. I think that's encapsulated in that, whether it be to dual lanes or whether it just be to even a single lane standard, but to a higher standard.
Through the chair, I think the dual carriageway mention was about the roads going over bridge crossings, in other words. So at the moment, like Wyatt Road or Andela Road, they are not dual carriageway roads, but in future they need to be upgraded. That's what it mentioned here. So if we include bridge upgrades, that covers that, I believe.
Concerns that I've actually just recently got from residents that live out there as well is there's no planning for the damage to the roads that are being done already from ARTC that have actually already accessed roads and that sort of thing. And there's no planning for the future. Is this going to cover that for them, especially for Bushman Drive, Drover Court, Teamster? And do we have those access points from ARTC, regarding where they're going to come in and access them there?
These are the access points given to us, and they're very they're not exactly certain, but at the same time they're saying this is where they need to access the route, sites. So the access points are based on those sites.
can we write to ARTC or can we write to the federal government so that they can actually give us some definition, they can give us some guidance about where they're going to access the local roads?
Yeah, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair. To a large extent, that is actually the context of the report. It is actually us writing to TMR, actually asking for some certainty around those matters, saying that we'd like them to actually have specific process in place in regards to that approval, and that be transparent, as we've actually noted. So certainly in regards to writing and trying to achieve those outcomes, that really is the purpose of the report, is actually trying to get that correspondence to TMR as the approval agency around around those expectations that we're having as council. So they're not, this document certainly is not a document that's a conditioning document for ARTC, where we're actually getting down to that specific detail. It is that higher order document where we're writing to them as the approval agency, saying as council we expect to see some more detail and some more transparency in regards to these matters, and trying to bring them to the table to have that. So I acknowledge that it's probably not that next step which you're really looking for, which is the detail around, so where are all those access points, what's the specific agreement we've got in regards to restoration of those, of the condition of the road, etc. But it's trying to, I guess, advocate at this stage to make sure that those things aren't overlooked, and trying to get TMR to actually consider that and be more transparent about how they're going to condition the project.
And just a final thing, like if we're putting all these conditions in there, can we also bind the trucks so that they're only staying on those certain main roads between certain hours, and they're staying away from the schools and they're staying away from those peak hours?
Once again, I guess we're trying to get TMR to that point. So we don't have the ability to condition this. We only have the ability to actually try and advocate with the department around what they are going to do, and try to get them to be transparent around that and to involve us in that. We certainly, I don't want to give an illusion that when we've actually said in here the things that we're asking them to require to do, it's not that we can actually enforce that. All we're trying to do is actually, I guess, influence TMR in how they actually approve the process, and trying to get some, I guess, reference back to us in that process, so we can have some input, or at least be clear and transparent on what they're going to do.
Thank you. And I acknowledge the fact that this has been an ongoing issue for council and for the residents of Logan. So now that we're in here and we're advocating for what is best for the residents, I do thank you and the team for assisting me and the other councillors that have residents that live along this line, trying to get the best for them. So thank you. No further questions from me.
Thanks, Councillor Wilcox. Councillor Fraser.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I've just got a question about, I've got a couple, but the first one, easy, I hope. Interested parties, it doesn't mention a specific community group. Would that normally be named, or do we just say Logan residents as a general sort of term in that?
Trying to find out with what context we are talking about.
Are you asking in the context that you wanted to say Boronia Heights, Greenbank, Hillcrest, or...?
No, it does, but I've got a specific group. So the Inland Rail Action Group, it's one of my residents, they run it. Should they be named, or would they normally not be? I'm just wondering, because I read it, I thought, oh, they're not in there. That's strange.
Okay, yeah, I actually looked at the people that could influence at this stage, interested in this at this stage, but I'm happy to include any other interested parties as well.
Thanks. One more question. So in the recommendation 1A, it mentions a few things about how we want to want them to be required to mitigate all these things, and in the Community Consultation Committee meetings, or CCC, no one likes to say CCC because it sounds like it's very corrupt and bad, which, matter of opinion. So, yeah, they've spoken about sound barriers and things like that, and people are a bit, they're not very trusting of all the data that they're receiving. So, for instance, they'll be told a sound barrier has to be, so high, so far away from this and that, and made out of a certain material. So if they were to provide barriers or other mitigation works, have we got the ability, or could we request the state government or someone else to also look over the what they're proposing, so that we can say, hey, look, ARTC have said this, but now we've looked over it and we think that it should be bigger, better, or we agree that their works are that they'll be effective. Is there any way that we can do that at all?
My understanding is this is the approval process. TMR will look into, they are the approval agency. They will look into the standards and say, okay, they comply the standards. That's how they're going to approve these things. That's the reason for us asking for a long-term agreement, so ongoing agreement. So if someone is complaining about noise or vibration, cracking the building, whatever, we could then address that. So that's the part that we haven't addressed in the past. So probably that will give a little bit of our input to, insight to what's going to happen in the future if something is not right.
Because also attending these meetings, I've found that they're just consultants. They don't determine much. They're just saying what they've been more or less told to pass on. But when people do bring up things that you could probably consider would be subjective rather than scientifically objective, it still matters to the community. So if we could definitely make sure that someone is looking over that, say, hey, look, a second set of eyes has gone over this, and yeah, bang, it's fine. And would we be able to change one of these recommendations to kind of reflect that at all, or would it be appropriate?
Mr. Director?
Certainly in that regard, where we're talking about sound barriers and the likes, with TMR being the approval agency for those development works, they have a lot more expertise in regards to sound barriers than we do. We have put in very few of those, whereas obviously TMR has had significantly more experience in that. They certainly build all of the ones that are adjacent to the M1 and the likes. Now, they have standards which apply to that. They are not they're not subjective, they're actually objective, where they need to actually meet requirements. So I can't envisage that they won't require their standards to be complied with. I think the bigger issue for us is the one around the breadth of how much they're going to consult and those sorts of things which we've covered in the reports. The actual technical sign-off to make sure that they're compliant with their standards, it would be their standards that they have to comply with.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for all your work. We really appreciate it,
Councillor Bannon?
Thank you, through the chair. I'm happy to support the recommendation. It's such a massive project with so many different things. It's going to be an ever-changing beast, and I assume this is stage one. You're going to drop these on, you're going to change these multiple times with the more information they finally give you. So I don't think you're across a lot of it to start. This is just a start. And the way I'm looking at it and here, it's a starting point. The more information you get, the more you're going to know which way you're going to put your attack in. And, and you're good at that. That's what you do as a job. So I'm happy to support the recommendation. I think game's just started. We just kicked off, so got a long road ahead of us.
Councillor Wilcox?
Just have one more, not really a question, just a request. I asked Advocacy the same just before, because they attend a lot more meetings than what we actually do as councillors. So I'm wondering if we could get minutes from those meetings so that we're across what's actually being said. And I know it is a bit more technical, but we do like to know what is going on, because it does affect our residents and that sort of thing. So wondering if we can get the minutes from any meetings that you attend with ARTC in the future.
Yeah, I need to talk to, we have this meeting not regularly, sometimes every month, sometimes even 2 months, whatever, when they are ready to present something. So I'm happy to give a brief notes of the meeting, no problem.
There's no other questions from the floor? I think when it comes to this rail line, it's a hurry up and wait proposition. One of the things that councillors can be proud of is that you've really made a significant input into the way in which these reports are written by raising local issues, raising local roads and bringing those concerns forward. Obviously the team in council do a cracking job, but having that local input assists them greatly with moving forward on recommendations, reports and letter writing. So thank you very much. Can I have a mover for the report, please? Councillor Bannon, seconded Councillor Wilcox. Pardon? With the amendments. with the amendments as listed on the screen. Does everyone want time to read them? It's 4 words. So we've got Councillor Bannon moving, Councillor Wilcox seconding. All those in favour, raise your hands, please. Councillor Heremiah?
Against.
Against, noting that Councillor Heremiah is against. Thank you very much. That finishes the Road Planning Infrastructure Manager's report. Does anyone have any general business for the manager? Councillor Bradley.
Thank you so much. Thank you, through the chair, Councillor Lane. Mr. Ranawira or Mr. Riley, I'm not sure who can actually help me with this. So there was a council resolution back in September last year that the Road Infrastructure Planning Manager be requested to invite the Department of Transport and Main Roads to deliver a presentation on the M1 Pacific Motorway Upgrade Program, Daisy Hill to Logan Motorway Project. Historically, TMR have always given us a confidential briefing as councillors about future projects. This project is actually physically happening at the moment, and my understanding 2 letters have been sent to Mr. Paul Noonan, the Director General, in relation to inviting him to present to us confidentially in committee. I'm just wondering, and I've also met with the state member and asked to find out what is going on, because obviously it impacts the residents I represent in the city, and I'm blindsided by what is actually physically happening, and I find out, just as the general public find out, of drainage works, of other works, which is really unacceptable, in my opinion. I'm just wondering, have you had an update? Is there any other suggestions that you can actually give us to actually find out what is happening?
Mr. Ranawira, has there been a response to Council's requests or invitation to come and give a briefing?
Not officially, but I think I had a discussion with the officers. They are aware of it, and they said they will come back and give a presentation to the committee. That's where it sits, to be honest.
Councillor Bradley, is it your intention you want the officers to write to, if they can't get an answer out of the Director General's office, where they want to write to the Minister?
I think that's the only way forward, because like this, we're supposed to represent our community, and we can't advocate for anything. There's no communication, which is very unusual. This has never ever happened in my time as a councillor, and like I said, I feel like I'm totally blindsided by what's going on in the area I represent. So yes, I do think a letter to the Minister.
Do you want to take that off the line, or do you want to put forward a formal motion in general business?
Formal motion, thank you.
Okay, so let's just draft that up. Councillor Bradley, is your preference that the correspondence come from the Mayor or from the Director and officers?
I think in the first instance from the officers, and then if there's, then the Mayor second after that if we don't get anything.
Councillor Raven.
Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The sigh was because the Mayor, if you want to write to the Minister, the Mayor should do it. Officers do not write to ministers. Politician to politician, officer to officer. So if you want to write again in the first instance to give them a nudge to the DG or the DDG of TMR to get them to provide a formal response, very comfortable with the officers doing that. But if we're writing to the Minister, let's get the Mayor to do it.
As you are the acting Mayor at the moment, would you do that?
In the next 3 days, sure. I'll get it drafted up and Either
So we
I'll
do-
sign it or we'll get the mayor to
Just
sign it on
interrupt you,
Friday.
sorry. We do have the director is fully prepared to write to the Director General again as a prompter and then hand it over, or is it your preference to go straight to the top?
This is to go straight to the top. This has been going on way too long. The works are physically happening at the moment and we're in the dark.
Councillor Raven, you are the top. So a motion is that the Mayor be requested to write to the Minister for Department of Transport and Main Roads requesting a briefing, a confidential briefing to councillors on the current works for the M1 expansion and busway.
Busway and V1.
Can I ask can I ask Mr Riley a question, Madam Chair?
Councillor Raven.
Thank you. Mr Riley, you've obviously got a letter that you've already sent to the DG before, is that right?
I believe.
You've sent that? So if you just want to retool that, I'm happy to sign it for you today, tomorrow, whenever you like. We'll get it straight away. No, it was for...
Am I allowed to talk through the chair? I think that was directed at me.
Just give me 1 second because I missed
No.
all of that. I'm still trying to draft your
It's okay,
motion.
that was for the staff. If they can get it, if they can rejig that so it's addressed to the Minister instead of the DG, then I can sign it straight away and get it put in the post.
Perfect. So we're just drafting now. Motion that the Mayor be requested to write a letter to the Honourable Mark Bailey, Minister for Transport and Main Roads, requesting a confidential briefing to councillors on the current works for the busway and M1 expansion. Get rid of the Department of. Councillor Bradley.
Yeah, can I just ask for a suggested change in the wording? It's upgrade stage 3A, Daisy Hill to Logan Motorway. Sorry, beg pardon. It's the M1 Pacific Motorway Upgrade Program, Daisy Hill to Logan Motorway Project.
Say it again. Sorry.
M1 Pacific Motorway Upgrade Program. And particularly current works for the busway, M1 expansion and V1.
There's a motion on the board. Councillor Bannon.
Probably through the chair, probably a question for you, Mr. I'm not sure the difference with this when it comes, it's a similar thing for the Mount Lindesay Highway. I've got massive issues with the Mount Lindesay Highway. They're going to ruin the town centre. I've always believed that the department talks to the department. So, should I be including the Mount Lindesay Highway in this? Because it's huge. It's massive. It's the biggest thing that's ever happened in the whole town. It could ruin my town centre. It could ruin what we've spent with their EDNS with their Jimmy Summit. So should I add Mount Lindesay Highway to this? Otherwise, or do we...
Before you respond, Mr Director, Councillor Karansky, do you want to be included in the Logan Village Waterford Tambourine?
Well,
just be
I just,
everyone.
in the last committee, I actually raised what we're advocacy doing around the Waterford Tambourine Road area, and the answer was that they didn't know if they were doing anything. So that being said, it would be certainly my preference to hear from TMR also pertaining to the Waterford Tambourine Road as well as the Mount Lindesay Highway. We did used to get quite regular updates on those key advocacy priorities and how they were progressing. And clearly, Councillor Bannon at the moment, they've actually sent out flyers and Facebook posts to all the residents in the Jimboomba area. This is going to have a significant impact down there. So I agree with you. I feel we're in the dark, really. We're learning about it via social media as opposed to being briefed on these things.
Councillor Murphy.
Can I throw in there the camera connector as well, please? That'd be great if we could just
Just one moment, my
All
typing
major
skills
road
are through
upgrades.
another person, so we're going a bit slower. Just councillors, just talk amongst yourself for 2 minutes while we bullet these items and get the terminology correct. Thank you.
While we're drafting that, can I just elaborate, and just for the record, so in the previous committee, I referred to the director and asked about Springwood master plan, and is it possible to have that amended? And really that can't be until we actually find out where the busway is coming out, what the plans are, etc. So it actually holds back our planning, our council's planning for the future generations. So hence why.
Completely acceptable. I don't know that we can put that sentiment into this motion, but certainly we can into the letter, and I think that everyone appreciates that town centres across Logan are waiting on these answers. Okay, a motion's going to appear on the screen. Can I have councillors reading that motion and seeing whether or not it needs amendment or whether they're okay to proceed as listed on the screen? That the Mayor be requested to write a letter to the Honourable Mark Bailey, Minister for Transport and Main Roads, requesting a confidential briefing to councillors on the current and planned works for the V1 busway and M1 Pacific Motorway, Mount Lindsay Highway, Coomera Connector and Waterford Tamborine Road. Oh, that's a lot of hands that just went up. Councillor Bannon.
Through the chair, should we be saying Mount Lindsay Highway, South Street, Tamborine Street? Because it's a very long highway, and that's the section that we're worried about. So should we name, or do, yeah, so we specific of what we're doing?
We're amending item B to go hyphen South Street to,
And take the E out of Lindsay.
no, leave the E in. That's the correct spelling.
I think the Mount Lindsay Highway is part of, I mean, Tamborine Road is part of Mount Lindsay Highway.
Yeah, I was just saying, Tamborine South, just that section.
Councillor Karansky, did you have a proposed amendment to the item? I'll just work through them.
Tambourine is just spelt incorrectly, just remove the U.
Okay, amended version up on the screen. Please read carefully. East, west and south. Can I have a mover for the motion, please? Councillor Bradley, a seconder. Councillor Karansky. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Councillor Heremai, you heard that motion. How are you voting?
For.
Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously. Does anyone have any other business for Mr Ranawira? Just recognising that not all staff can be here today. Does anyone have any business for the Director? Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, and thank you to Councillor Bradley for saying that she's been in the dark with roadworks occurring in her area, because I'm constantly in the dark about roadworks in mine. But I did want to thank the Director and the staff. On Tuesday last week, residents again got stuck in Flagstone, and it took them an hour to get out of Flagstone and to travel 2 kilometres because of roadworks that none of us knew about. And it took us about 4 hours to actually find out why the roadworks were occurring where they were, and they blocked the one entrance in and out of Flagstone. And I had residents contacting me from 8:15 in the morning, and my phone did not stop for about 2 hours flat, and poor Mr Riley copped lots of text messages for me because I was screenshotting text messages and screenshotting Facebook posts to let him know just what was going on down in Flagstone and that sort of thing, to actually help me find out what was going on and how we could actually assist the process and that sort of thing. But I did want to make it very clear for residents and that sort of thing that, especially the Flagstone residents, that traffic controller was working outside, and they did admit they were working outside of their permitted hours and that sort of thing. They didn't contact the transport companies, so I did that. I contacted the schools letting them know that kids were going to be late, they were going to be late home, people literally couldn't get through and all this sort of thing. And then it took me till about 1 o'clock when I was on the phone to the transport controller themselves going, if you keep doing this at 3 p.m, it's going to happen all over again. And then we devised a plan on how to best operate in the afternoon, and then I popped out on site at about 2:30. So my whole day was taken up with this last Tuesday, but I just wanted to thank Mr Riley and the whole team for all of their investigations that they did that morning for me and that sort of thing, so that we could combat it. But yes, I would like, to be all over the roadworks and that sort of thing, especially when they're blocking my one lane in and out of Flagstone, or my beating heart, which is my roundabout up at Teviot Road and Middle Road at the top end. So, and it does bring to a point that yes, there is desperately a need for a second exit in and out of Flagstone, which is the Newbeath Road that needs to be connected. But again, this won't work until the Greenbank Transport Study is implemented and it is fixed at the other end. I'm very aware of it. I'm trying to make it very clear to residents that there's literally no point in connecting Newbeath Road at the moment until that whole transport study is done. So until we can actually get the whole SRIA implemented and fixed for my residents down there, which I'm advocating for on every avenue that I can get, and I would like to be able to really have my say, as Councillor Bannon stated before. I would really like to be able to advocate what's best in the order for the residents that live out there, so that it is done correctly. So, but thank you to the team for Tuesday.
Thanks very much. Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wilcox, for reminding me about an issue that's been banging around inside my head. Mr Riley, traffic management plans. When a contractor does what happened to Councillor Wilcox, which is operate outside the approved traffic management plan, what course does council take? Do you fine them?
Through you, Madam Chair. Council has an ability to require, and it comes particularly with our development applications, for a transport plan to be lodged, which council reviews and we place conditions upon. That process then proceeds to the police, who provide a traffic permit. That process is a review arrangement for council where we endorse their traffic management plan that they're obligated to have under law. We do not have an ability to fine individuals when they don't then comply with their plan. Their plan is an obligation under workplace health and safety legislation in Queensland. They're obligated to comply with the MUTCD. It is their obligation.
How do we fix that? Because if we have a reviewing role where we have, and it's on our road, in our network, how do we fix it so that we have a stick that we can hit people with? Because they're not going to change their behaviour if all we do is go, oh, that was naughty, you just wasted hundreds of hours of people's time while they sit in traffic. So I think the community would expect that we would enforce those traffic management plans. What do we need to change to make it work?
I'm more than happy to come and have a talk to you about it. It is not something we're going to resolve in committee. That is a significant piece of work and sits across a fair amount of legislation. So it sits across our planning approvals, how we actually give those, the conditions which actually sit within there, then through to how we actually endorse that, and then through to the police as well. So that there is a big piece of work there. If we want to talk about that, we can certainly have a talk about that and see what progresses from there.
So it sounds like you, me, Councillor Lane, Stephen Ball sort of conversation if planning's involved as well?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent, cool. Nathan will organise that for you. He's nodding at me right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bradley.
Thank you. I'm just a little bit curious about all those comments because whilst I don't know Councillor Wilcox's issue about how that all happened out at Flagstone, whether it was a development or what, but I know that just only recently there was a development in Division 1 where someone actually did get fined because they were operating outside the hours. So I'm just curious.
They're referencing the traffic controllers, Councillor Bradley, not the actual businesses doing the construction work.
This involved traffic controllers
Did it?
as well. Yeah.
Was it reported?
Yeah, so it, and Stephen Ball is definitely aware of it. So, well, at least his department was. So that's it. They definitely got fined. So,
Councillor Raven, I think you might want to put some input into this.
Councillor Bradley's right, they were fined. It was a construction management plan breach, which we spoke about in the previous committee. So when DA has an approved construction management plan, the construction task force can issue fines if people are outside of that. Unfortunately, as Mr. Riley referred to, when you're just doing traffic management, which might not necessarily be related to development, it could be for like private works in the verge or something like that, we don't have the same level of control. It'd be lovely if we did, and hopefully we'll be able to find a way to achieve that with the help of about half of the organisation and the chair, and we'll be bringing something back to committee one day.
now, the difference, I wasn't familiar with what it was.
Are there any other questions for the Director? Now that all the needy people have been dealt with. Mr. Director, can I ask my question, which is road offsets. So a lot of residents approach councillors and the chair of this committee about when council is clearing land on the side of the road that we're actually tearing down either protected trees or we're damaging habitat. Can you please explain to councillors what our offsets program is, whether we're required to do it, and in instances out west where most of the paddocks have been cleared, are we the only green part of that reserve?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm taking the question to be in regards to when we're actually doing roadworks and we need to actually remove trees to be able to facilitate that work within road reserve. So there is legislation which covers trees within road reserve, and then there is broader legislation that covers vegetation which sits within Queensland more generally on private property. So in creating road reserve has been created for the purpose of providing traffic connection throughout the state. That's whether that be in Logan or across the rest of the local government areas or the state government. So to that extent, there are protected trees which are actually covered under federal environmental mapping. There are protected species and the likes. Council certainly, with those processes, works to identify those trees. We actually undertake, we bring in technical experts in that regard, and we have processes around those. There is, however, more general legislation that talks about mass land clearing as it sits on private property, where that's occurring for development purposes, and there are some requirements within council where those developers need to either offset those trees or to pay a monetary compensation for that. That broader land clearing component doesn't apply to clearing which is done by council targeted specifically at transport purposes, but the protected tree components under legislation we do actually comply with. Tied with that, because we are at times looking at vegetation which actually has wildlife, fauna, those things attached to that, for our larger construction projects, we actually also engage technical experts in that regard. We actually do identification process. We actually have those experts come out and actually look for what fauna exists in those areas. We actually do counts on animals and look to see what type of movements would be attached to those. Where we have that work then done, they make advice back to us which we incorporate into our projects. So depending on what species they find, if we have migration that we need to allow for, we would then build into those projects fauna crossings or underpasses or the likes. But they're very targeted to what we actually find at those specific projects. Does that answer?
Yep, just one more question. Where there are trees being pulled down or land being cleared and there are animals displaced as a result, do you have fauna watchers, and what is the process for protecting local wildlife?
We certainly do. Once again, we actually employ separate consultants with technical experts in that area, but certainly when we're doing clearing of trees within the road reserve, we actually have spotters on site for the entirety of that work, and we look to either relocate those animals. At times there will be trees that we won't knock down because they actually have wildlife attached to those, and we would either look to move those or to wait for them to actually move themselves, but we have processes we work through to do that. So we certainly aren't out there just knocking down trees with disregard to those animals or wildlife that may actually be in those trees. Yep.
Thanks very much. The reason why I raised that question is we've got a number of roads that are going to be coming up for roadworks, and obviously some clearing will result from those, and I just wanted to make sure that councillors were across that they can come to you, get that wording and make sure that their residents are aware that we do have planning processes, investigations, and that they can actually respond to residents properly. Thank you. No other questions. That being said, I declare the meeting shut at 11:30 a.m. Thank you very much, everybody.